Alright guys, it is time once again for our annual Pokemon Bitch Fest, because we have our Pokemon Scarlet and Violet Expansion Pass damage report, which I've been meaning to get this out for a while. I've had a lot going on the last few weeks and I haven't had time to fool with it. But I did manage to see an entire playthrough of all this DLC. I have my notes here with all my facts and figures and all that straight. So we will be going through the DLC, and I'll give my thoughts on all the content from it, which hopefully we can keep this on the shorter side, since most of my thoughts are generally the same as they were for the base game, as well as everything Pokemon has been putting out the last few years. But anyway, diving right in first off with the Pokedex stuff, as always, this DLC did add 257 Pokemon to the game. Now this includes the 17 new Pokemon that were introduced, as well as 240 returning Pokemon. So this brings the total number of Pokemon in existence up to 1,025, while it brings the total number of Pokemon that are actually in the games up to 733. So that means there are still a whopping 292 Pokemon that are not available in Scarlet and Violet. Now, for comparison's sake, Sword and Shield post-DLC wound up with 664 out of the, at the time, 898 Pokemon that existed, which means they were missing 234 Pokemon. So, Scarlet and Violet actually have more Pokemon in them than Sword and Shield did. However, they're also missing more than Sword and Shield were missing as well. Additionally, if you rank all the games based on how many Pokemon are in them, Scarlet and Violet would come in third, just ahead of the Gen 6 games that had 721, and still well behind Sun and Moon in the number 2 spot, which had 802. And then, of course, Ultra Sun and Moon are still dominant in the number 1 spot at 807. So that's the Pokedex situation. I maintain that anything under all of them is completely unacceptable. So there's no excuse for this. I've ranted about this enough over the years. But yeah, it's bullshit that we don't have the complete national dex in every game. Tying into that a little bit, as far as the moves go, the updates that they have released for this game to go along with the DLC did make 40 moves that were previously unusable, usable once again. So we got 40 moves added back into the game, which I think there's still like 130 something or somewhere in that neighborhood that are unusable. I don't have the exact number. So there are still a lot of moves that are missing from the game as well, in addition to all the past gimmicks. So, still no Megas, no Z moves, no maxing, none of that shit. So, still missing a lot as far as that goes. But moving on from that whole debacle and getting into the actual content of the DLC itself, it was split into 2 parts, the first of which was the Teal Mask, which was released last fall. So this part actually let you travel to an entirely new region called the Kitakami region, which it's a different region, but it's not like the size of a full region. It's a much smaller area. But you go here on a school trip, and you meet some new characters named Carmen and Kieran, who are both pretty annoying, like everyone else in this game, pretty much. Carmen is basically just Nimona 2.0, and then Kieran's like her little brother who's, wimpy and no confidence and kind of follows you around like a puppy dog. But anyway, you meet up with them, and then you go through the whole story with Ogerpon and the Loyal 3, and you get the lore on them and all of that. So story-wise, it was pretty much on par with the base game, which is definitely not a compliment, because I didn't care for the story in the base game, and I didn't really care for the story much either. Now, the other big addition from this DLC was the handful of new Pokemon that they did introduce into the game. The first of which is another one of the regional fake lines like we had 2 of in the base game. This one is based on the Sinisty line, and their names are Poltergeist and Sinischa, which I'm still not a fan of this whole regional fake concept. These designs are fine. I don't have any issue with them particularly. They evolve in the opposite order than the line they're based on for some reason. But yeah, the designs themselves are fine, but I still am not a fan of the overall concept and wish they would just, stick to doing regular regional variants. Which we did not get any more of in either part of this DLC, so there are still only 2 Paldean forms. But anyway, beyond that, we also got a third branching evolution for Applin named Diplin, which is based on a candy apple, which I've never been a huge fan of the Applin line in general, and that I maintain that here. Diplin's fine, I guess, but I'm just not much on that entire line. But then we have the best thing to come out of this DLC, because there's actually a side quest in the game where you meet this girl named Perrin, and she's supposed to be a descendant of What's-His-Nuts from Legends Arceus. Adaman, I think his name was. But anyway, you go on a quest with her, and you end up meeting a new form of Ursaluna named Blood Moon Ursaluna. And this design is just absolutely fantastic. I love the way this thing looks. It is so fucking cool. I liked Ursaluna to begin with, but this thing is just really awesome. Now, this thing is sort of a standalone form, as in you cannot get an Ursa Ring to evolve into this thing, and there's also no way to change a regular Ursaluna into this form. So you just catch this one as parts of the story of that quest, and there's no way to get another one or breed another one or do anything with it. So it's sort of functions more like a legendary, where it's a standalone thing and not something that you can access in any other method. But it does look absolutely awesome. Them implementing it like that does make me a little concerned that it's going to end up like spiky-eared Pichu or something where we never see it again. But yeah, I do absolutely love the design of this thing. So beyond that, we do have the legendaries that they introduced, which I've already went over my thoughts on the Loyal 3 in my last Pokemon video, so I'll skip over them here and just go into Ogerpon, which we have a much better look at now. And we have learned that it has 4 different forms, based on which mask she is wearing, which I do like all the forms. I do think they look good. Now, each one of these forms does also have a special terastallized state. So when you terastallize Ogerpon, instead of just getting the goofy-ass crown on its head, instead its mask grows giant and becomes like a giant crystal thing in front of it, which does look a lot better than the goofy crowns do, so I kind of like the looks of these terrestrial states. However, the one positive thing I had to say about terastallizing in my damage reports on the base game was that there wasn't any special forms or anything tied to the gimmick, so when they inevitably remove it in the next games, we won't be losing out on any designs. And now that is clearly out the window. So that sucks. We'll probably never be able to see these forms again, because I'm sure they'll drop this gimmick like they've dropped all the other ones when they move on to Gen 10. So while I like the look of all of these, it does mean that Ogerpon is going to end up in the cook shed with Necrozma, not being able to access all of its forms anymore. We have another case of this in the second part of the DLC that I'll get to later as well. But yeah, overall, as far as these designs go, all of them were really just, I was kind of neutral on them, or I really liked them. So, fairly good as far as the designs go for this one. Now, as far as the rest of the DLC goes, just a few random things that I want to mention here. One thing that I will actually give them a little bit of credit for, we do get some new outfits in this, once you get to wear a few different Jinbei outfits, I think is what they're called. Which means we can finally put on something besides those hideous-ass fucking school uniforms. So, that in alone deserves praise. Those school uniforms are fucking terrible, man. So, the Jinbei does look a little bit better. You're still very limited as far as options go. as far as trainer customization, especially compared to any of the past games that also featured trainer customization. So it's still limiting, but at least you got something that doesn't look completely fucking awful. So beyond that, there's also a little mini game that they added in called Ogre Ousting, which is very similar to the little mini game they had in Legends Arceus, where you ride around on Weird Ear and pop balloons. This is a similar thing here, where you ride around on Koraidon or Miraidon, and you pop balloons to get berries and then take them back to these containers. So it's nice to have some little side activity to do, at least. Another thing that I do want to give them half credit for, I guess, is that there isn't really full level scaling in this DLC, but there is a binary in the fact that the levels of the opponents change based on whether or not you completed the story of the main game yet or not. So if you haven't completed the main game story, the levels are rather low, and if you have completed, they do shoot pretty high up into, I think, the upper 70s, lower 80s range. So it's not full on level scaling, but it's more than you got in the base game, so I'll give them a little bit of credit for that. Now, on the other end, we do still have the problem of there's no fucking indoors, which was a big issue in the main game. I complained about that a lot. It's the same thing here. When you go to Kitakami, there's a whopping one building that you can actually go inside, and that one building is exactly one room. So there's not much indoors in this region either. Mostly everything is still like the outdoor stands and stuff. So that's a problem from the main game that definitely has not been addressed here. So that's pretty much all I wanted to mention about the teal mask. Moving on to the second part of the DLC that they released a few months later, which was the Indigo Disc. So this part of the DLC sent you to a new school called Blueberry Academy, which actually turned out to be in the Unova region, which, other than lore implications, didn't really change anything because you can't go to any part of Unova outside of the school, and the school is out in the middle of the buttfuck ocean, so it's not like you're getting to see any of the Unova region or anything. But you go to this school, and it kind of functions like the academy from the main game, where you actually can go inside. It's a building you can enter, but it's just a series of rooms separated by a menu, so you can't fully explore it. You just, teleport from room to room. But anyway, you do have the academy, and the main draw of the academy is the underwater terrarium, which is this giant area, which I guess technically is indoors too, but it's made to look like it's outdoors. So you have a giant area that is full of Pokemon, and it's divided up into 4 little sub-biomes that are supposed to be like different climates and stuff, so you can catch different kinds of Pokemon, and even regional variants of some Pokemon in certain areas. So it's basically another big area for you to explore. Now, story-wise, you go to this school as a foreign exchange student, basically, which this is the same school that Carmen and Kieran go to from the first part of the DLC. So you go here and you meet them again, and you meet up with a bunch of other new characters that have also awful designs, just like every human in Gen 9. I don't know what's going on with this art direction. But you meet all these new characters, some of which are actually related to some of the characters from the Unova games, which we find out through some side conversations and stuff. Which the plot here is you meet all these characters and you end up joining the League Club, which the head of the League Club is the champion, which is Kieran, who has done a heel turn and become basically a little asshole kid who only cares about winning. So you end up having to fight through the Blueberry League Elite Four, which they call them Elite Four, but they really function more like gym leaders because you got to do like a little trial challenge before you battle each one of them. But then once you beat each one of them, you can end up battling Kieran, and you beat him and become the new champion and sort of snap him out of his asshole attitude. And then you go with this other teacher lady named Miss Breyer back to Area 0 along with Carmen and Kieran, and you go down into the Underdepths and end up catching Terrapagos, which is that turtle Pokemon that we saw back when they first revealed the DLC. So story-wise, I really wasn't much into this part of the DLC either. All these characters are just really unlikable to me. I hate their designs, I hate their personalities, I just kind of hate everything involved with everything about this. So I wasn't much on any of that. But anyway, moving on. One of the big additions that they did add with this part of the DLC was actually a new Terra type that any of your Pokemon can become, which is called the Stellar type. So we do get another new goofy ass looking crown, which this type is meant to be sort of like all the other types combined. Which the way this works is your Pokemon just retains the defensive properties of whatever their original type was. But then as far as offense goes, all of their moves gain a boost regardless of what type they are. Although each type of move only gets the boost once. So like if you have a fire type Pokemon and you terrestrialize it into the Stellar type and it uses a ground type move, then the ground type move will get a boost the first time you use it, but then if you use it again the next turn, it would just do the normal damage that it always does. So it's not anything real broken or insane like that, but I guess that's the best way they could implement some, sort of Omni type of all of them combined. So we wound up with that, which that does tie into Terrapagos, which I'll get to here in a second. But speaking of which, we did get another handful of new Pokemon added in this part of the DLC. The first of which is actually an evolution for Diplin, making Diplin the only evolution of Applin that can actually evolve a second time. But he got an evolution called Hydrapple, which, like I said, I've never been a fan of the Applin line, but this one is probably the best one of the bunch. I actually don't mind this one at all. Which you can't see it in the official art here, but he actually has 4 other heads that can come up out of his apple, so he's got like 5 heads like a Hydra, and he actually looks kind of cool when all the other heads are out. So we got him. Additionally, Duraludon, of all people, got a new evolution as well called Arcaludon, which looks fucking retarded, which Duraludon himself looked retarded to begin with, so I guess it's on point. But I don't know what's going on with this design. He's supposed to be like a bridge and somehow ends up looking like a staple puller. I don't know how they managed to pull that one off. But I'm not a fan of that whole line at all, and this certainly does nothing to help that. So next we also got the other 2/3 of the trios that were started by Walking Wake and Iron Leaves. So we got our 2 other ancient Paradox Pokemon that were inspired by Entei and Raikou, and then our 2 futuristic Paradox Pokemon inspired by Terrakion and Cobalion, which I actually like all of these designs. The futuristic ones are named Iron Crown and Iron Boulder, respectively, and the ancient ones are named Gouging Fire and Raging Bolt. So, again, weird names, but I do think they all look pretty cool. Raging Bolt does straight up look like a tall neck from the Horizon games. But, yeah, overall, I think they are good designs. The Paradox Pokemon in general, I have been a fan of, and these continue that. And then, of course, lastly, we do have Terrapagos, which ended up having 3 different forms, actually. The first of which is its normal form, which it just takes on outside of battle, which is just like a small little sort of baby turtle form. And then we have the form that we saw when he was first revealed, which is his Terrastal form, which he automatically changes into as soon as he enters battle. And then he has a 3rd form, kind of similar to Ogerpon, which is a special terrestrialized state, which is called Stellar form. So when you terrestrialize him, his terrestrial type can only be Stellar type, and he changes into this big blob of crystal bullshit, which I'm actually not a fan of this design very much, but it ties into the lore of him, so yeah. So again, just a few general thoughts about this part of the DLC. One thing that did kind of end up surprising me is that there was no battle facility in this game. I was expecting this to sort of fill that role since the base game didn't have one. This didn't have one either, so there is no battle facility. There's a place where you can rematch characters and stuff, but there isn't like a proper battle tower or any equivalent anywhere in this game. One thing I do want to give them a little credit for is that most of the battles in this part were double battles, and all of the teams are actually pretty well made teams. They were high level, like level 80 something teams. You can only do this part of the DLC after you've beaten the game, so it is meant to be post-game content. And, being able to do double battles does add a different dynamic to it. So, gameplay-wise, I will give them a little bit of credit for that. Another thing, since you're part of the club league in this new school, you do have access to the league club room, which is a room that you can actually customize the appearance of to an extent. But you can change that around, and you can have characters show up there to battle them and trade Pokemon with them and get items and stuff. So that is another thing that even after you finish the story can add another activity for you to do. Another thing they added was a thing they call the Synchro Machine, which this tied into the whole Let's Go auto battle feature from the main game, which I was not a fan of. What this thing lets you do is when you send out your Pokemon to do the auto battle, this lets you synchronize with them to where you can actually control the Pokemon directly. So it's like a third-person view, but you're running around controlling the Pokemon itself as it runs around and battle stuff. So it's supposed to be like, seeing the world through your Pokemon's eyes. Which is okay, I guess. I hate the whole auto battle concept, and this doesn't really do anything to change that. But you're able to control them in some extent, so I guess that's better than just letting them run around and do bullshit. So it's okay, I guess. Beyond that, we did, of course, get our obligatory, catch all the past legendary side quest thing, which was a guy named Snacksworth, who you can talk to after you complete some blueberry quests, which are like little side tasks to do in the game. Most of them's just like, catching a certain number of Pokemon or whatever. But you complete enough of those, and then you talk to him, and he gives you a little snack treat thing that you can take off and go to a certain location with it. And you actually can catch a particular legendary Pokemon there. So, that's the equivalent of the Ultra Warp Ride or the Dynamax Adventures or whatever, to catch all the past legendaries. So then I will give them a little bit of credit for this too. They did continue doing something that they've been doing with a lot of the more recent games, where they make some of the older mythical Pokemon actually catchable in-game, because there is a method to get Meloetta in this part of the DLC. So it's nice that they're making some of those old mythicals more obtainable. It would be nice if the games they were obtainable in weren't the dribbling shits, but what are you gonna do? So yeah, that's pretty much all there was from this part of the DLC. Now, there is one other thing I need to mention here, because a few weeks after the DLC came out, they actually did release a mystery gift event item called a Mythical Pecha Berry. And once you downloaded this item, what it lets you do is you go to this one place in Kitakami, and it can actually unlock a little short storyline epilogue for the game that lets you take all your unlikable friends from the base game to Kitakami to meet all your unlikable friends from the DLC, so they can all be unlikable together. And you end up doing this really lame-ass storyline where you meet the one new mythical Pokemon that they have introduced for this gen, which is named Pecharunt. Which, when I first saw him, I didn't mind his design or anything. I thought he was fine. But after watching this epilogue, I actually ended up hating Pecharunt just because the epilogue was so fucking bad, it rubbed off on him. It wasn't even his fault. But this story was fucking terrible. Like, you literally go back to, what's the name of that town? Mosoi Town? Or whatever the town in Kitakami is called. You go back there, and everyone in the village ends up getting possessed by Pecharunt. He feeds them like this poisonous mochi that makes them start doing like this retarded chicken dance. And that's not even a joke. That's literally the plot of this epilogue. So the whole thing is just like a lame, retarded joke. And I am just so out of patience as far as that goes. Like, everything has to be a lame joke now. Between all the meme bait designs and the stupid, oversized terrestrial crayon things, and the terrible plot lines and the stupid mochi dances and all this shit, like, why does everything have to be so lame? Like, can't you just be cool for 5 minutes? Just be cool. Killing me. So I didn't like that. This epilogue was probably the worst part of the DLC. Actually, I just couldn't stand any of this. But yeah, overall, my feelings on this DLC is pretty much the same as my feelings towards the Sword and Shield expansion pass. Where, like that expansion pass, this one didn't really address any of the issues that I had with the base game. In fact, it made a few of them worse. It did nothing to, kind of shift me towards actually wanting to play these games. Hell, that epilogue was so bad it might have did the opposite and made me more turned off to the entire thing. But yeah, I'm not a fan of the DLC. I'm not a fan of the base game. I'm not a fan of Gen 9 in general. And nothing I've seen here has done anything to change any of that. So I'm pretty much in the same spot I've been in as far as the entire Pokemon franchise goes. Now, I'm recording this on Monday night, and tomorrow morning actually is Pokemon Day, and they are having their Pokemon Presents show, which may or may not have already happened by the time I get this edited and uploaded. But I'm sure there'll be some announcements during that, so we can wait and see what horrors await us on that show. But depending on what they announce, I don't know if I'm gonna do a video about it or not. I expect them to make some sort of main series announcement, but yeah, we'll just have to wait and see as far as that goes. But anyway, I guess that's all I got to say, so lots of luck to you and yours.